So I'm here in beautiful British Columbia with the Ford Focus ST. Now the Ford Focus ST is the new hot hatch for Ford, and it's called a hot hatch because they've essentially shoved one of the more powerful engines into a very common basic looking car. And this for me is a very important car because A, it's Ford's chance to demonstrate that they can build fun to drive hot hatches, and at the same time it's very accessible to a lot of people. So to make it a little bit more interesting, I've also brought along its current rivals in the hot hatch segment, being the obvious Volkswagen GTI and the Mazdaspeed 3 from Japan.
These cars do more things at a reasonable price than any other car category I can think of. North America traditionally has been a bit deprived of this genre of cars, which is a real shame. And 10 years ago, you could only buy one of these hot hatches. But now there are 3 very different takes on a hot hatch. How has the game moved on? Let's find out.
All right, so I've got the Focus ST first. This has got the 2-liter turbocharged engine, which they call EcoBoost. And oh yeah! I mean, listen to that sound. Well, from an ergonomic perspective, the first thing that really comes to mind are these Recaros. They just elevate this car above the other cars. From a dashboard perspective, it's pretty typical Ford Focus. There's not a lot different aside from a couple of gauges you get up top here, which are difficult to see from where I am. But you feel like you're driving a Ford Focus, especially when you're just poodling around town. The 2 big things that I love, absolutely love about this car, in addition to the Recaros, is A, the way this car steers, and B, the way this car goes. You have peak torque at 2,500 RPM and peak horsepower at 5,500 RPM. And in between that rev range, whoa, it just goes. And the chassis responds to your inputs. There's not a whole lot of feedback from the steering, if I'm honest, but the car is so direct and it just goes where you want. Like, you point it in that direction and it will go in that direction. And with these standard fit Eagle F1 tires, oh my God, this car, like, I am comparing this car to a sports car because of the way it handles. And the sound it makes, it's this beautiful, like, growly note. The power and torque are so accessible. You know, the car is so usable, and it just goes with you. Those pedal positions are a bit of a crux though, because I want the ability to modulate those brakes, and very difficult for me to do that in this car. And with the throttle position being so offset from the brakes, it makes it difficult to heel toe, and that hurts this car. You know, it's so close to being such a good car, such a great car even, and the throttle positions kind of ruin it for me. It's still very capable, very accomplished, and the fact that I'm sitting here and frankly raving about a Ford is something I never thought I would be doing. All those years that Ford built these cars, I would say the last 10 years, and quite honestly, a lot of them were not, from a dynamic perspective, not great, okay? And to have a hatchback that does this, you know, this to me is what's gonna get Ford ahead in this game. And no, it's not gonna be for everyone. Some people are gonna think these Recaros are too form-fitting, and that's fine. But the fact that they're not scared to build a car like this is something that should be admired. All right, let's get up this hill here. Oh yeah. You can feel the wheels scrabbling around for traction. And then once it gets on the power, oh man, oh, this car is seriously impressive. Like, seriously impressive. And then when you slow down, you're just driving a Focus. It's no big deal. What makes this car really special to drive is really down to two things. The first thing is the variable ratio steering rack, which adjusts the amount of steering you have
based on how far away from the center of the steering wheel is.
And the second thing is the enhanced torque vectoring control on this car. When you turn into a corner, the chassis automatically brakes the inside wheel. And so what happens is the torque gets sent to the other wheel. So essentially it's propelling you through the corner. And the idea here behind that is that it helps to quell understeer, or the feeling of pushing into a corner. And by God, does it work. 250 horsepower in a front-wheel drive car. 10 years ago, it was all about all-wheel drive cars. And now, who needs all-wheel drive when you have a car that grips and goes like this front-wheel drive car? It's amazing. Torque steer, there's a little bit. I mean, you got 270 pound-feet of torque at 2,500 RPM, and you're going to have some torque steer. But the effect is not as bad as you might think. And I'm sure it's helped by those Eagle F1 tires. I'm so thankful that cars like this exist, because quite frankly, there's no real like market for them. But what they do is they elevate Ford above the competitors. You know, if you really want to get ahead of Toyota and Honda, what do? You make a car they don't make. And what's that? A hot hatchback. And this car will do that. And you know what? I love the fact that this car is yellow, because if you're going to be a hot hatchback and you want to be an exciting car, why not have an exciting color? Okay, so I have here the Volkswagen GTI. This is the Mark 6. And in my mind, this is the de facto standard for hot hatches. And the interesting thing about the GTI is that it's, you know, in the 40 years that it's been around, it started off as just like a little side project from a bunch of engineers that wanted to make something a little bit more interesting. Who could have predicted that it would have turned into the success it is today? You know, there's a reason why the GTI is the de facto standard. And one of the main reasons is the fact that it's just so damn good at everything. This is the 6th generation. It's got a 2-liter turbo making around 200 horsepower. And so torque and power-wise, it's actually down on the other cars by quite a bit. But what you get is you get this certain sense of quality that's not quite there in the other cars.
The VW definitely stands out amongst the group in terms of fit and finish. The interior plastics are a bit less, well, plasticky. The gauges are simple and easy to read, and the metallic elements on the car are actually made of metal. If I was the kind of person that shopped at Whole Foods and had square glasses, I would be very appreciative of the tartan pattern on the seats.
The turbo in this car, unlike the other two cars, is very linear. If I got into this car and nobody told me that it was turbo, I wouldn't even think anything of it. I would think it's a normally aspirated engine. The turbo just kind of breathes on the car a little bit, and it just lifts it to give it that extra power and torque. It feels very capable. You never feel underpowered in this car unless you've just stepped out of the Ford Focus or out of the Mazdaspeed 3. The one that I have here is equipped with the DSG, direct shift gearbox. Essentially what the DSG is it's 2 manual boxes in one that's controlled by a computer. So essentially you have one manual gearbox, and it's got gears number 1, 3, and 5, and you have a second gearbox that controls gears number 2, 4, and 6. And so what happens is, if you're, say, in first gear, the second gearbox knows you're going to shift to second, so it spools up the second gear and it gets it ready. And so as soon as you flick the paddles or push the lever down at the bottom to kind of push into the next gear, the gear's ready for you. So for an automatic, it shifts very quickly. Now, it's not Ferrari speeds, but the response is quite immediate. I would have liked the manual better, but the DSG is very competent, it's very efficient, and I would totally understand if somebody got this car because they do a lot of commuting, but they still like to have fun. So how does the car drive? It's very capable on long sweeping turns, but where it gets a little bit unsettled is when you have a lot of chicanes where you need rapid direction changes. And the car starts to get a little bit pear-shaped in terms of the handling. The steering feels, I would say, a little sluggish for a lot of tight turns, but if you're just puddling around town, it's okay. You know, you don't have that same darty precision that you have in the Ford Focus ST, where as soon as you turn, the car is ready to go. It's a little bit slower, a little bit more refined, and that's kind of echoed with the whole kind of aura of the GTI. I would say there's a bit more feel from the steering than the Focus ST, and the brakes are a lot more progressive, which I like. But is that worth the trade-off of slightly less composed dynamics and an engine note that is, it's okay, but after you get out of the ST, you kind of miss that growl that it had, you know, and that's just something about this car that tells you it's a little bit more refined. You know, you don't blow out your eardrums. If you want a fast car, that's a hot hatchback. If you want a practical car, that's a hot hatchback. If you want a car that's comfortable, that's a hot hatchback. If you want a car that's kind of cool, I think that's a hot hatchback. I think hot hatchbacks are extremely cool, and a GTI is just the definitive essence of a hot hatchback. First impressions of the Mazdaspeed 3. What do I think? Kind of like the base Mazda 3, I have the same sort of complaints with the dash layout. It's got current fuel economy, range, temperature, and time on one screen, and then there's a separate one that shows other stuff on the other screen, and then there's a third screen for like your phone, your navigation, and when you're in a driver's car, which I think this car is, you want fewer distractions. You want something that focuses on the driving experience, you know, and there's just a little too many things to look at here on the dash. But the one major thing that I would say this car lacks compared to the other two is the overall feel of the car. It's just a little bit cheaper. You feel this in the way the steering wheel looks. You feel this in the way that the interior plastics look. You feel this in the way that the seats don't really quite have enough bolstering for a car with this sort of horsepower. So overall, the interior is not the greatest, but let's be honest, when it comes to a car like that, interior, not really a big deal to me. The ride is quite firm. I'm on a smooth road, but I just went over a bump and kind of feels like you've just been violated. The pedals are in a nice position for heel toe work, which it definitely has an advantage over the ST in that sense. Now, the engine in this car is the 2.3 liter Dizzy engine, which is their direct injection engine. That was previously used on the Mazdaspeed 6 and the Mazda CX-7. This time in this car, though, it's been tuned for 260 horsepower and 280 something foot-pounds of torque. That's a lot in a front-wheel drive car. This car relies on electronics to kind of limit the power in first and second gear. Now, when you do that with 280 pound-feet of torque, it's only going to do so much. So you definitely feel some torque steer. And this car torque steers worse than all the other cars by some margin. Unlike the Ford Focus ST, which has the clever steering and torque vectoring system, this car is a little bit more conventional in the sense that it uses a regular steering rack and it uses a regular chassis. But what you do get is you get a much more raw experience. The Focus ST was a lot more stable in the corners, and you felt that kind of solid feeling with that car. In this car, it moves around with you. It behaves like a non-front wheel drive car, frankly. Get it into a corner, you kind of do some late braking to get that nose in check, to help counter the understeer and help shift the weight balance forward. And you can do that in this car because you're not relying on phenomenal amounts of grip. Does it have grip? Oh yeah, for sure, it does have grip. But you have that chassis to play with. It's a little bit more willing to kind of play with you and a little bit more chuckable than the other two. It's not quite as fast and not quite as competent as the Focus ST and not as polished as the Volkswagen GTI. But what you get is you get somebody who's willing to spar with you when you're driving. And you could feel it in the corners, like it kind of slithers around a fair bit. But you know what? That's what makes this a more, I would say, old school hot hatchback. There's not a lot of clever differential stuff doing the work for you. It's just you managing the car's wheel spin. And it's just you steering the car. There's no torque vectoring system. That turbo boost on both these cars is so addicting that when you get involved in the car, you just want to be on that turbo boost all the time. It's like a drug. You have to go back for one more hit. And whenever you have traffic and you can't get on the turbo boost, it's frustrating. It's frustrating as hell. But when you do get on that turbo boost on a nice stretch of road, oh my goodness, it's addicting. And I can see why people like turbos. And this car to me is an old school turbo. Up until 3,000, it's got nothing. And then once it hits 3,000, you got a bunch of wheel spin. And that kind of imperfection in the way it handles it is what makes it more endearing to me. And it makes the car brim with character. It makes it feel alive. It makes it feel like you are driving this car and nobody else. And that's what makes this car fun. And debatably more fun than the other two. I like that it's not perfect. I like that it is not perhaps the fastest way to get from A to B, but with driving, we're all about fastest routes from A to B. We wouldn't be driving cars, we'd be getting on a train, right? It's about the fulfillment you get from driving, and in the Mazdaspeed 3, I get that in bucket loads. So, if you're looking for refinement, if you're looking for a smooth ride, if you're looking for a nice high quality interior, this is not the car. But if you are looking for a rambunctious, fun to drive, playful, hot hatchback, this is the car.
All three of these cars are quite different, and to pick a winner of the three would be quite unfair. The VW GTI is the mature one of the group, comfortable, stylish, with a sporting flair. It would make for a great commuter car, exciting enough for the occasional backroad blast. If you're looking for polish and overall usability and competency, this is your car. The Focus ST is a valiant effort from Ford, with that awesome sound from those double hex-shaped exhausts, the body-embracing Recaro seats, and that tireless engine. This felt like the fastest car of the bunch, and if you're looking for quickness, this is the car for you. This car makes you feel like an absolute hero. But for me, I like my hot hatches a bit crazy, and nothing ticked that box better than the Mazdaspeed 3. Sure, it had turbo lag, the steering torqued worse than Miley Cyrus on a Sunday morning, and the interior was cheesy. But the way the car danced around corners and kept me engaged in the process was absolutely addicting. This is the car for you if you don't care about lap times, but just want to have some serious fun. But seriously, how can you lose with any of these choices?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah! Gets it ready. And that's fine. Whoa! A regular, which I like. A hot hatchback. A hot hatchback. A hot hatchback.